I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com. Today we're going to make date squares, or you may know them as date bars, date slices, or my mother always called them matrimonial bars. I'm not sure about where that name came from, but this is what they look like. You have 2 layers of a buttery oatmeal shortbread, and then we're going to put in between a layer of pureed dates. So good. So the first thing we're going to do is our date puree. So you will need 3 cups, which is 400 grams of pitted dried dates. There's a dried date. And you can buy them with the pits already removed, but they're typically more expensive, so it's not a big deal to take the pits out. So you just cut it down the center, and you have this, and there's your pit. Pretty easy to do. Now, typically, at least if you live in the States, you can find the dried dates in the produce section of your grocery store. Usually, at least I find they're in plastic containers. So what we're going to do is take our dates and put them in a saucepan. Because typically the dates, on the dried dates, the outside skin is kind of leathery. And what we want to do is soften that. So you put your dates in the saucepan along with 1 cup, 240 milliliters of just filtered water. And then we're going to just cook our dates over, medium heat, just until they're softened and they've absorbed most of the water. So that's going to take, depending on your heat level and that, 5 to 10 minutes, and just give it a stir every once in a while. Okay, so our dates have absorbed most of the liquid, and I'll just pour this in here so you can see. There. So that's what you're looking for. Now, what I like to do at this point, if you've ever had dates, you know they're really sweet tasting, and I really like that flavor to come out in these squares. So all I'm going to add here is 1 teaspoon, 4 grams of pure vanilla extract. And really, if you don't want to add vanilla flavor, you could just leave that out. I mean, if you want, at this point, you could even add a little bit of orange zest or lemon zest. So now what we are going to puree these dates, but we're going to let them first cool down to room temperature. So I'm just going to let them sit on the counter here, do that, and when we come back, we will start our date squares. So now we're going to make our oatmeal shortbread batter, but first, preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 180 degrees Celsius, and then you will need a 9-inch square, 23 centimeter baking pan, and I'm going to butter it. You could spray the pan with one of those non-stick sprays. What I like to do is I just melt a little bit of butter, and then I take a pastry brush and brush the bottom and the sides. Don't forget the corners. And then I like to just take a square of parchment paper and put it on the bottom. Because I'm not going to remove the squares, I'm going to cut right into the pan. And so if I put that parchment paper, then I won't cut, leave marks on the bottom of my pan. So now, I'm going to make my batter in a food processor. I mean, you could use a stand mixer with the paddle attachment, or you could use a hand mixer, or really you could mix this by hand as well, but I'm going to use my food processor. So now you will need 2 cups, which is 180 grams. I'm using old-fashioned rolled outs. Now there's 2 types. There's the old-fashioned and there's the quick cooking. Really the difference between the 2 is in the thickness of the oats. I like to use the old-fashioned because they are thicker, and it gives you a more chewy flavor to your bars. Now, if all you had is quick cooking, you could use that. And then you will need 1 cup, 130 grams of all-purpose flour. You may know that as plain flour. And then 3/4 of a cup, 160 grams of light brown sugar. If you're using a measuring cup, kind of pat that brown sugar down into the cup because it's soft and there's a lot of air there. And then you will need a half a teaspoon, 2 grams of baking soda, half a teaspoon or a quarter of a teaspoon, just 1 gram of salt. And then I like to add just a pinch, like 1/8 of a teaspoon of ground cinnamon. I like the flavor of that with the dates, just a hint. But if you don't like ground cinnamon, you can just leave that out. So that was easy enough. Put everything in there. So now I'm just going to pulse this just for a minute, just to get everything mixed together. You could do the same, like I said, either with just a bowl with a wooden spoon or in your stand mixer. Mix it together, and then you will need, this is eggless because it is a shortbread. We're going to add 1 cup, 225 grams of cold butter. And then what I do is just cut them into small pieces. And we're just going to put this all in here. And then I'm just going to pulse it. So you could rub it in if you were doing it by hand with your fingertips. Just pulse it until the butter will break down, and just until the batter starts to clump together. I don't want a solid ball of dough, just until it starts to clump. Okay, that's good. Your machine starts to make a different sound when it starts to clump together, so that's a good way to know. So now, see, as you can see, they're starting to clump, but there's still loose pieces, so that's what you're looking for. Now, we're going to put 2/3 of this batter on the bottom of the pan. Now, if you have a scale, I mean, you can eyeball it, but I'm using a scale, makes it much easier. 450 grams. Okay, that there, and I'm just going to press it down. I mean, you can use the back of the spoon. I'm just using my hands for this. Okay, just kind of run your hand. You can see if it's even. Make sure you get in the corners. It feels good. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just pour the rest of this into a bowl, because we are going to use our food processor to puree our dates. That's why I kind of use the food processor to make the batter. You know, if you can save yourself some bowls so your cleanup isn't as much. So. And I don't bother to wash in between here. So now I have my dates that they've cooled down to room temperature. So put that in here. The other thing you could do is use, you know, a blender to do your dates, or even or an immersion blender if you don't have a food processor. Okay. Good. And if you didn't have a blender or a food processor, you know, you can just use a fork to kind of mash them up. Okay, so I'm just gonna scrape out the bowl there. And then you can use the back of a spoon, or I'm just using an offset spatula to spread that out. Okay, that looks good. And then what we're going to do is just take the rest of the batter and just kind of clump it on top. Scatter it around. My mom made these date squares all the time growing up, especially in the winter time, because when I was younger, you know, you didn't have the fruits in the store in the winter, so dates, dried dates was one thing you could always get. And what's great about these two is they will store like up to a week in the refrigerator, at least a week. If they last that long, that is. They're really good. So, and then just gently press that into the date mixture. That looks good. So now for baking. Everyone's oven is a little different. I'm going to say somewhere between 30 to 40 minutes. Really, it's a shortbread batter, so the longer you cook it, the more crisp it will be. So I like to bake them until the top is a golden brown. Like I said, the longer you go, the crisper they will be. If you like them soft and chewy, then a little less, you know. But between 30 and 40 minutes, golden brown on top. Okay, so our date squares are done. As you can see, beautiful golden brown color. So put your pan on a wire rack, and then what we're going to do is let these cool completely. And then what I like to do, because even at that point when they cool down to room temperature, they're going to be fairly soft to cut, and then they'll be crumbly, which is fine, but if you want to do it that way. But what I like to do is once they cool down, put the pan into the refrigerator for like an hour or two, and that will firm your date squares up and make it much easier to cut them. So that's what we're going to do. So now let's cut our date squares. Sharp knife. As always, you can cut them as big, small as you want. First one's always the hardest one to get out. They're still a little soft. Okay. Whoop, left some of it in the in the pan. That's okay. Oh, wonderful. I'm gonna just get a knife here, cut a little bit off. So they're still a little soft, which actually, I like them that way too. Get a little of that shortbread. The date puree, you just think it's just dates with a little bit of vanilla. The flavor really comes through. Wonderfully sweet. And then, of course, you have the oatmeal shortbread, buttery. Because we bake them to the golden brown, they're nice and the shortbread's nice and crisp. You know, the combination of the two, to me, is just perfect. And the good thing is, you can cover and store these. I store them in the refrigerator. They will last at least a week. You could also freeze them. Like I said, they last that long. So try this. And until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of JoyaBaking.com.